Whoa, here he comes. Pew, 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 pew. Pew, pew. Hey, what's up guys? John Stayskull here. Welcome back to yet another Unity game dev tutorial. So we're going to be having a lot of fun in this video. We're going to cover a lot of ground. I'm going to teach you guys how to shoot in Unity in a 2D setting, multiple directions, loading dynamic prefabs as the bullets, making contact with enemies, decrementing their health, killing them, and also playing sound effects for both the gun animation and the impact with the enemy. And if you're new here, make sure you hit that sub button as I have plenty more game dev tutorials like this coming up. Alright, let's get into it. So as you guys know, I love sample scenes, and this tutorial will be no different. So if I press play on this scene, I'll just show you what we have. So I've just got a player controller that has a simple jump and a left-right mechanic. And this is actually the same code and system that I use in the Mega Man tutorial. And you might recognize some of these three ground check components here. And I'll actually make this whole sample scene available for you guys down below. So go down there for a link and I'll let you jump on and continue straight from here so we can focus on the good stuff in the shooting and not get bogged down by the walking and things like that. So what we'll want to quickly do first is just create an animation to support the shooting mechanism. Depending on the kind of game you might have a soldier shooting a machine gun. In this particular case, I've kept it simple to this block, just narrowing the scope a little bit. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to create a single frame animation. So if I go to my face component, I'll see that this is the object that holds the animations. I'm just changing the face. So you can see here that there's an idle. And if I go back to my scene here, you'll see the idle's also down here in the animation window when I select the face. And when I scrub over, you'll see there is just a blinking animation. So I want to create another animation for the shoot. So what I'll do, I'll click this little drop down here and I'll select create new clip. I'll go to animations and I'll just call this one shoot. And I'll add that, and now you can see I've got two animations now. And if I go to my animated component, you'll see now there's a shoot. So that automatically gets added when the animation is completed. Now, you might know from some of my previous tutorials, there's a few different ways you can create animations. You can select the frames from your project folder and drag them all onto the screen to create one. Or if you're using bones and a rigged skeletal, you'll be using a very different approach again. Or if you're using single frame animations like I am in this case, you can just drag them directly onto the timeline of the animations. So you see it's created that animation, but there's no frames. So we need to now drag a frame into the timeline. So you can see here in my player's sprite sheet, I've got a bunch of different frames. So I'm just going to grab the one I like, which is that one there. And I'll drag this into the timeline. Boom. And you can see here the shoot frame is now populated. So what you can do here, there's a few different tricks. If I select that frame and hit copy, you can then go a bit further down on the timeline and press paste. And what this does is it's just going to extend the frame for us. So the animation has some length. Because if it's just one frame, it might just very quickly show and disappear. So let's now do something with code. So this here is my player controller. And you'll see here, not much going on. Just got a rigid body component declaration, the animator for the face, a sprite renderer, a fixed update which checks for the floor and determines if it's grounded or not. An input for the left and right using the keyboard keys, and then simply a jump. So what we're going to do, we're going to create a new input for the shoot. So I'll say if input dot get key down, or we'll say get key actually. So get key down, get key up, kind of depends if you want like a shotgun effect or a kind of machine gun style effect. For now, I'll just do get key. And I've actually got a great tutorial on this, the differences in get key down, get button down. So if you guys want to get up to speed on that, you're welcome to jump to that video. So I'll say get key code, mouse 0. So mouse 0 will be our first mouse button. And you can also add another key code here if you wanted to. I don't know, let's say like the control button or something. So I'll say, oops, or input, oops, sloppy fingers today, guys, dot get key, and we'll say key code dot left control. And that should be the left central lock. Right, so here we're just checking if the mouse button is down, the left mouse button, or the left control button is down, then shoot. So after recording this video, I realized I made a little bit of a mistake where I put the input code in the fixed update instead of the update. Easy mistake to make, but I'll just ask you guys to copy and paste the input code for the shoot we've just written from the fixed update up into the update. And I'll make the necessary changes to the other input code for the sample scene. Now, if you follow along with the tutorial as is, it's not a big deal, it will still work, but you might get some mild latency issues on the input buttons. And what we're going to do here now, we're going to tap into that animation that we created. So I'll say animator dot play, and I'm going to say shoot with a capital S. So this now should, if we're lucky, play the shoot when we press the mouse button. Boom. Okay, so his mouth opened, but it's not closing. And there's a couple of ways we can do this. We can do this in the animator. We can right click and create a transition and tell it to go back to idle. And so, but I'll tell you something, right? I'm not a fan of this animator system at all. The mechanism, Unity mechanism as it's referred to. It really causes a lot of problems for a lot of people. And mainly is, the main problem is that over time, as animations get more and more complex in the game, you get this spiderweb effect, which is just chaotic and it's really hard to manage. So I'm a fan of doing things with code as much as I can. And you can see here, you can punch in different conditions and stuff, but why not just manage those conditions with code? Why would you have code managing certain conditions and then offloading the remainder of the conditions to the mechanism? So anyway, mechanism has its place, right? But I find it more suited to animations that have blending frames, like a rigged animation, like a 3D character that transitions between animations. But if you have just like a sprite sheet, frame-based animation, I beg you to reconsider and try to manage it with code. I mean, this is how people have been making games for decades, and they had no Unity mechanism and things turned out all right. But each to their own, everyone will have an opinion on this. This is my personal opinion, so take what you want from it. So one of the things is, if you're going to use the mechanism, then you need to understand everything else. Okay, so when I click this transition now, you see it's revealed a bunch of different things here, settings. Now I've got to understand all this fixed duration, transition time, duration, blah, blah, blah. And because we are using a sprite sheet, I'll want to set that to 0. And hopefully now it'll automatically, boom, okay? So it's changing back. And if you wanted to extend that, I can go down to the animation for this shoot and move these over like so. Yeah, I mean, look, it's a bit finicky, right? Yeah, I'm not digging it. So I'm going to do it the way I would normally do it. So I'm just going to get rid of this transition to shoot. And what I'm going to do, we're going to use code. So we're just going to delay. Oh, well, first of all, we're going to create a is shooting property, right? Because we want to keep track of this. So we'll say is shooting equals true. And you can hover over that and just hit that knob here and generate field, and that'll automatically create it over here. So we can just leave that private by default. And so its shooting is true. And what we want to do here, we just want to make sure that if it's already shooting, then don't shoot again. So what I've done here is very useful if you don't know it already. If is shooting, then return. All this means is I'm saying if it's true, then just stop. This function will not go any further. It's going to stop right there. So what that means is I'll be able to shoot once, but not again. Rather, I want to reset this manually. So I'm going to say invoke reset shoot. And now we just need to make a function by that same name. Just make sure we are in the right scope. Okay, so I'm going to say void reset shoot. And here I'm just going to say is shooting equals false, and animator dot play idle. And this, I've just got a syntax error here, so I just got to. So this is the important thing, right? The second parameter here is how soon after the first time we shoot should we be able to shoot again. Now, if that property is very small, like less than a second, or like a tenth of a second, then it's going to create a machine gun effect. Boom, 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 boom. Where if we give it a value of like, let's say 1 or 2 seconds, it will be boom, boom, where we can't shoot again until that has reset. So I'm just going to call this, I might make this into a property. I'll say shoot delay. That seems like a reasonable name for this. I'll just at the top here, and I might just give it a value of 1. And what we can do, I might just serialize that. That way we can tweak this through the inspector later on just to fine tune it. You know what, I think half a second sounds a bit better. So let's go back down to where we were. All right, so let's just run that and make sure that every half a second the animation is returning and it's all working. Boom, boom. All right, so now finally let's actually shoot something. So the first thing you're going to need some kind of bullet. So I've taken the liberty of creating a bullet already. I've just created this kind of coronavirus looking bullet. And a good way to do it is to use your character's graphic as a reference for the size. Then you can just turn everything off and crop like so. So let's drag this bullet in just so we know what we're dealing with. You can see here it's falling behind the player a little bit. So we just want to, maybe we'll bump up this Z minus. Remember, minus is towards the camera, towards you is negative. And we just keep changing that till we find we're above the player, okay? And that sometimes happens with background components too. If for whatever reason, like your bullet is not showing, look at the background's Z position, look at the player's Z position, and just make sure that things are not overlapping other things. And another trick here, if you hit this little 2D icon here, you can jump into 3D mode and you can just examine your scene. Like so, you can just kind of work out where everything is. It's a nice little trick. So anyway, we've got our bullet now. A couple of things we're going to want to do. We're going to add a rigid body 2D, and we're just going to freeze the Y position. And we're doing this so that the bullet does not drop. We want this bullet to fly straight across the scene. And we'll freeze the rotation maybe too. Freezing the rotation will stop it actually rotating on its axis. Cool. And what else? How about we give it a circle collider, because more likely than not, we're going to want to have it collide with something. And we'll also, while we're here, we're just going to create a tag up here. Because if you're creating bullets, you're more than likely also going to be checking collisions with that bullet from an enemy or an object or something like that. So you'll need some kind of a tag, just to save us doing it later. Get it all done in one go. So we'll go plus tag. Whoop. There's layers. No, I don't want layers. I want a tag. And I'll call this one bullet. Alright, go back to the bullet. Make sure we've got the bullet selected from that. Let's make sure this is a trigger. Because if it's not a trigger, it's going to actually collide with the player when we spawn the bullet. And it might even push the player back or interact with the player's body. Because the player also has a rigid body, right? So let me just run that and show you guys what I mean. So you can see if I select the bullet, see, I can actually move the player around with it because it's also a rigid body. So we don't want that because we want to kind of shoot it from the player's mouth. So I'm going to make that a trigger, and that should allow us to spawn the bullet on top of the player. And which leads us to the next step. Going into the player and just right-clicking and selecting Create Empty and create an object. And we'll say bullet pos, or let's give it a better name, bullet spawn pos. And you can then click over here in the inspector, give it some kind of a little icon so we can see it. And what this represents is we just want to keep track of where we want to spawn the bullet from. And that will be around here somewhere where the player's mouth is. I mean, now why are we doing this? We're doing this so we don't have to manually code this position and be tweaking it, making little adjustments and trying to work out where we need to actually line that up with. So it's like a nice little cheap way to do it. But it also means that we need to then map this in the player script and do it like so. Next step is we need to turn this bullet into a prefab. So you can simply do that by dragging the bullet into your assets folder. What I like to do is create a folder called prefabs, and then grab that bullet and drag it into there. And I'll just delete this one from the scene now because we don't need it, because we have a prefab in the library that we can drag in at any time, like so. So let's jump back to the player script and actually start shooting this thing. And I'm sorry if this is getting a little bit long. It's primarily because we're going through all the little details so that there's no confusion, because the last one did cause some confusion to people. Partly because I was expecting... I left the last tutorial that I did on shooting intentionally incomplete. Why would I do such a thing? Because I wanted to actually have people attempt to learn and fill in the blanks and make it work. But it was a bit of a disaster because I determined that a lot of people just are so new to programming that it's just going straight over their head. So hopefully this one will alleviate some of that tension. So, okay, let's go up here and we're just going to, much like we did the ground checks, I'm just going to say transform bullet spawn pos serialize field, and now we will, oh, and the other thing is we want to now store the bullet prefab, and this will make sense in just a moment. So game object bullet, and we'll serialize that field. Remember, serialize just means that we want to expose that property in the panel. So just give that a moment to let it refresh, and you can see now we have in the player controller script got the shoot delay. Okay, the bullet and the bullet spawn pos. So for the bullet spawn pos, simply click and drag that bullet spawn pos and bring it into there. You can also click that little knob over here and do it like so. And for the bullet, once again, you can just find the prefab in your library and drag it in, or you can click that little knob and find it in your assets folder. And the cool thing is that we can then swap the bullets very easily. We could, you know, we could say crate and have this dude shooting a crate or anything like that, and that's pretty powerful and cool, right? So let's now shoot this thing. Unbelievable! I'm gonna do it. So we'll go back to down where we were shooting, and we'll just put a comment here quickly. Stand T8 and shoot bullet. So I'm going to say game object bullet equals instantiate bullet. And that, well, this is a problem now. I've got two variables doubling up, and you don't want to do that. So we'll say B, just for short form. So to give the bullet momentum, we'll simply say B, which is the reference that I'm using here, dot get component rigid body 2D dot velocity equals new vector 2, because we're in 2D, and we'll say 3, this will be the horizontal velocity, and 0 for the Y. And we'll just do a test of that to see how it goes. So that's pretty cool, and we can improve on that. And there's a lot. We've got a few more steps to go because we still have to get to the shooting from left to right, and that's where people were getting snagged. Right. So that 3, we should probably make that into a class variable, and we'll call it shoot speed, bullet speed. Well, actually, so this is the thing, right? If you're making any kind of meaningful game, the reality is you're probably going to have different bullet types. You might have power-ups and you pick up different bullets. And those bullets might also have different speeds and attributes and damage outcomes and things like that. So you want to have a bullet script, and on that script, you can have like a fire bullet, ice bullet, and you want to be able to manage those attributes. You don't want to have them on the player. You don't want to be having the player responsible for knowing how much damage every type of bullet is going to do. So I like to put on the bullet itself, and to do that, I'm just going to ditch this from here, okay? And what we're going to do, I'm just going to jump back to Unity. We're going to find that bullet in our inspector. We're going to click it, and I'm going to give it a script. We're going to give it a bullet, well, new script first of all, and then bullet, bullet script. And you know, people might have different ways of approaching this, and that's fine. So just open that bullet script up, and here we will want to give it a few things. So we're going to say float speed, serialize that, and we can, you know, we can say things also like float damage, or you can make it an integer, up to you. Serialize field. I mean, damage might be is better as an integer. Integer being a whole number, and float being a kind of floating point, decimal place number. And what we're going to do here is the critical thing. So we're going to get rid of this start function, and we're going to get rid of the update. And rather than having those, I'm going to create a void, a public void, in fact, and we're going to say start shoot. And in here, we're going to just create a reference to the rigid body. Rigid body get component rigid body 2D dot velocity equals new vector 2, and here we're going to pass in speed for the X and 0 for the Y, and we're going to call this from the player. But before we do that, one thing you'll notice here, right? The bullet only seems to have the code to travel in one direction. So we need a way to have it shoot left as well. And how we're going to do that is we're going to tell it. We're going to have the player tell it which direction it's going to be facing. And I'll just show you what happens if we don't do that, first of all. So let's go back here. Or rather, let's go back to the player controller. And here, I'm going to say b.getComponent bullet script. And we'll say start shoot. All right, so the player is just telling the bullet to do its shoot. So we'll just run that now. And it's not working. Why? Because we haven't given the bullet a velocity. Remember, we serialized that. So find the bullet prefab over here, and see, speed is set to 0. So here we can kind of change the speed to 10, 5, 50, whatever we want. 10 seems like it might be a good amount. That's really cool. And on the player, you might know we have a shoot delay. So I'm just going to change that shoot delay to be 0.2 and try that again. Pew, 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 pew. We've got some issue here when we move. I'm just going to resolve this issue first. So it's... Oh, right. My bad. I haven't mapped the bullet's transform position to the bullet spawn pods. So b.transform.position equals bullet spawn pods.transform.position. Okay, so this should spawn it at the player's mouth every time, whether I move or not. Pew 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 pew, pew 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 pew, pew 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 pew. Very good. So what happens if I now face left? Aha. And that's the issue that a lot of people have been running into, because they're like, how do you actually make it shoot left? Right? Because the player's turning left, but why is the bullet not turning left? So let's do that now, and I'll explain to you guys. So we need to tell the bullet which way it should be facing. There's a few ways we can do this. The bullet can check the player's facing direction, or we can actually tell the bullet directly through that start flying function. So we're going to do that, but to do that we need to actually be tracking the player's facing direction. Now this is critical, and you can see we're not doing that in this particular script here. So we're just going to create a property called is facing left. We'll make that a bool, and we're going to use this to track the player's facing direction. And by default it'll be false. Remember, if you don't actually add anything into a bool, it'll be false. And then in the code that tracks the left to right direction changes, we're just going to say is facing left equals true when the left is pressed, and is facing left equals false when the right is pressed. Now we can provide that bool to that bullet. And to do that, we're going to use the fancy word is dependency injection, but we're simply going to give it a an argument through the parameter. So if we go to that start shoot function in the bullet, we're just going to create a bool here, and we're going to say is facing left. All right, and we're going to do this now. If is facing left, and we might just change this a little bit, because I don't want to be, just make it a bit cleaner. Just give me a moment. I'm just going to say rigid body 2D equals get component rigid body 2D. And if is facing left, then rigid body 2D dot velocity. I'm just cleaning this up for you guys. Sorry about that. Okay, so if is facing left equals true, then make the velocity of the bullet negative speed. So minus whatever we set it to, and this will make it shoot left. And for the other one, we'll say else rigid body 2D equals shoot right. Okay, so if we're not facing left, then we must be facing right, and then we should shoot the bullet in the correct velocity direction. So we just go back to the player, and now we just got to pass in that is facing left parameter. Just going to run that now. Pew pew pew. Pew pew pew. Look at that. Pew pew pew. Pew pew pew. Mew mew mew. Pew pew. Pew pew. Pew pew pew. Pew pew pew. Pew pew. Pew pew. And you can see that works perfectly if we are jumping or not. A few things to consider here. We've got a bunch of clone bullets that are being created here. So I'm just going to get rid of those. And we can do that in the bullet script. So after the start shoot, destroy. And we can simply say game object, which is we're going to destroy this bullet. Give it a comma, and we can pass in a time. So this is actually probably also worth serializing at the top. You can say time to destroy. And we can give it a default value. We'll say 1, 2, 3, maybe like 3 seconds. Yeah, 3 seconds. And we can pass in that time to destroy here. So all this means is when we run this and shoot bullets, those bullets are not going to keep stacking up the way they are currently. If we wait, you see all the bullets are getting cleaned up. So we've got a very easy, simple to use shooting system. Maybe we'll throw in an enemy and try to quickly code that up in an express way. And I've got an enemy here that I created in a previous tutorial. This is an aggro enemy. So when we get close, he wakes up. Let's shoot him. Nothing happens. So let's quickly now come up with a way to destroy that enemy. We'll just have an internal health check that we'll then use to actually just remove the enemy from the screen. If you want to learn how this enemy aggro works, please go over to the enemy aggro tutorial that I created, I think a couple of months ago or something like that, and you can learn that there. So I'll select my enemy, open the enemy script. You can see I've got a bunch of code here for the aggro, raycasting, and checking the player. So all that was part of a previous tutorial. By the way, if you're a Patreon supporter, you get all of these complete tutorials and much, much more. A lot of game making tools and things you can use for your own games at your own leisure. So yeah, and it also helps support this channel. And by the way, thanks to these guys who are supporting me on Patreon. I know this is a tough time for everyone, and me and you both. We're nobody's immune from this situation right now. Well, none of us peasants anyway. I'm sure there's people who are making a shit ton of money during a time like this, but for guys like us, we're just doing our best to keep things going. So thanks to you who are supporting me and this channel on Patreon. I really appreciate it. Thank you. All right, so in this enemy script, or if you have an enemy script, you can just add this to your one. We're just going to create a on trigger enter 2D, and we're going to check for that bullet tag. So say if collision dot compare tag is bullet, and say health minus minus. And I'll say if health is less than or equal to 0, destroy game object. All right, and we're just going to create a property for health at the top here. And I'm just going to give it a hard-coded value for now. And I'll just give it like a, I don't know, 10. So 10 hits, the player should be destroyed. The enemy should be destroyed, rather. Pew, 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 pew. It's going through the enemy. I don't like that. If the bullet hits the enemy, then destroy collision dot game object. So you can actually extract the game object data from the collision event. What? Pew 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 pew. Killed him. And what you can do then, you can then create like a particle blast or something like that. something to make it a bit more impressive. You might want to make the enemy flash. But I've actually got tutorials on all those things, so go through my tutorials feed. I've got tutorials on how to make enemies flash, how to make them explode in a burst of particles and things like that. Yeah, but we really need some sound, don't we? Alright, let's fire up Audacity. Let's do this. I wasn't planning to do this, but we're going to do it. Pew! Pew! Alright, so we'll just export this sound. So to play a sound is very simple. You just need an audio source. For now, we're just going to stick it on the player. I think that's the best place to put it. So I'll say audio source. And then in the audio source settings, you just want to give it a clip. So we've got pew. Pew. All right. So let's jump into your player controller and let's create an audio source. I'm going to say audio source, audio S, that'll do it, or audio SRC. Cool, and we'll go to the start function and we'll just say audio SRC equals get component audio source. So this is just going to get whatever audio source is on the player. If you've got more than one audio source, you will want to serialize this audio source and drag it in the inspector to define which one. But right now we've only got one audio source for the shoot, so that'll do. We'll just go down to our shoot function and we'll just play that audio source. Let's run that. Pew! Pew, pew, pew. Pew, 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 pew. Pew, 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 pew. So we'll also need something for the enemy, right? Why not? Alright. I think that'll be just fine. Alright, so much like we did with the player, we're just going to click on the enemy. We're going to create an audio source. We'll give that audio source the sound file it needs. Go into our go into our enemy script. Say audio. Oh, I hate this autocomplete. Well, I love autocomplete, but I also hate it sometimes. Say audio SRC. Yeah. Go to the start function, audio source equals get component audio source. Now, just want to say one thing quickly. I don't recommend necessarily playing all your game sounds like this. It's just a prototype, just a sample scene. If in your own game, especially if the game is going to be growing, I recommend building a sound manager through either a singleton instance or some other management system. I'll get into that in a future tutorial, but for now, doing it the way I'm doing it is okay. Right, so we're just going to go down to where the enemy gets hit, which is somewhere over here, and we're just going to go audio source dot play. So at least now we will get some reasonable feedback from the enemy. So you might have noticed that those things are playing automatically, and that's because by default audio sources play on awake, you see? So you just want to make sure that those things are ticked off for both the player and the enemy. Pew. Whoa, here he comes! Pew, 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 pew. Pew, pew, pew. Pew, 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 pew. Perfect. I'm really digging that. Oh, that's a lot of fun. Alright guys, I hope you've found this video useful. I don't know. Give this video a big thumbs up if you found it useful. And if you haven't already, make sure you subscribe to the channel, as I have plenty more game dev tutorials like this coming up. Alright guys, stay safe, see you in the next video, and as always, all the best on your game dev adventures.